والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to lecture number 6 in psycholinguistics. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is speech production. If you remember from the title in lecture number 1, we mentioned some goals of psycholinguistics, and we mentioned one of the goals, which was how people use language to speak and understand one another. So today we are going to focus on the psycholinguistic processes that are involved in speech production. So before we speak, what are the processes that take place in the mind before we are able to produce speech? First of all, we mentioned that language here is in the middle. We have meaning before we speak, before we say anything. There must be something in your mind that you want to say, right? Otherwise, whatever you say is nonsense. So first of all, you start with the meaning, with an idea in your head, saying that, well, I want to say something about this topic or that topic. This is called meaning, and we have another name for it, and I'm going to give it to you in a minute. And then we have language, which is in the middle, and then we have the signal. The signal can be speech, for example. So there is a difference between speech and the meaning. You have meaning. The language transforms the message or the meaning to a signal. Okay? It transforms it to a signal. The signal, of course, is speech, as you can see here, or sound wave. All right? This is just an overview of the sections that are included in the book about this topic, but we are going to focus on some of them. We're not going to cover them all. First of all, what do we call this idea? This idea here, meaning. What do we call this idea before it's produced, before it's verbalized? We call it a pre-verbal message. This is it. Pre means before, verbal as in speaking. So before speaking, the message that you have before speaking. This is called pre-verbal message. All right, let me just erase this. All right. So it's called a message before it is verbalized. It's called pre-verbal message. So this is what you start with when you want to speak. As I'm speaking right now, I know what I'm going to talk about. So I'm thinking about it. Then language does the magic, and then the speech or the sound is produced. So we want to focus on the processes that are here. We are not really that interested in knowing the meaning or what goes on in the mind or how we think. If you talk about how you think, then this is more psychology. We want to focus on language. So what processes are involved in speech production? So overall, we start with the pre-verbal message. Okay? Then language does the magic. We want to explore this language. We want to expand on language. We want to elaborate what language is, what processes are involved at this stage. Okay. As you can see here, let's imagine that you want to say, the girl pets the dog. The girl pets the dog. Here you have a picture of a girl and a dog. A girl and a dog. All right? If it's a picture in your head, then this is called what? A pre-verbal message. You want to say that the girl pets the dog. Till now, this is only an idea. This is not language. It's just an idea in your head. And as you can remember in lecture number 1 or 2, there's a difference between thoughts and speech or language. So now we want to focus on language. We are not interested in the speech that is produced or the thinking or thought. We want to focus here. What is language? What happens in language? So language is not only, like, let's say, a tunnel, for example. So you get an idea here and then you get speech there. No, there are processes in the middle. And this is what we are going to focus on today. Okay. All right. So first of all, what is the first step that takes place when you want to produce this sentence? The girl pets the dog. First of all, obviously, one of you might say, well, words, which is true. First of all, we start with words. However, we don't call them words here. We call them lexical items. So lexical selection. And again, if you remember in Introduction to Linguistics and Psycholinguistics, we talked about the lexicon. Lexicon. What is a lexicon in lecture number 1? Lexicon, the words of a language are called its lexicon. So we start with the words or lexical items. And here we have 3 lexical items. Girl, as you can see, girl, dog, pet. One of you might ask, what is the difference between words and lexical items? Just going to give you a brief answer. Lexical item includes how the words are pronounced. That's number 1. Number 2, it's part of speech. So here we have a noun. So girl, this is how it's pronounced. And then N, which is noun. Then we have information about this word. So for example, plus human. Girl, yes, it's human. So plus human. It's plus animate. Yes, it moves. All right. For example, here we have dog. So this is how it is pronounced. Then we know it's a noun. It's part of speech. And then, is it human? No, it's minus human, so it's not human. Dog is not human, so this is minus human. And you can have as much information as you want. So, for example, plus animate, yes, it moves, it's alive. Maybe plus black or whatever color it is. Any piece of information that is related to that word. So this is called a lexical item, because it contains information about the part of speech, how this word is pronounced, and information, semantic features. Here, for example, we have pet, which is the girl pets the dog. We know that the word pet can be a noun or a verb. If you say, this is my pet, then this is a noun. But if you say the girl pets the dog, then this is a verb. So here we have pet, this is how it's pronounced, and then we have V, which stands for verb. And okay, it's animate, it's agent, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of information about the word. So that's stage number 1, lexical items. So now we know what words we are going to talk about. That's stage number 1. Then, what happens with these words? Syntax takes place. Syntax. So who did what? Is it the dog that pets the girl, or the girl pets the dog? So in syntax, we have these syntactic trees. You've studied syntax, hopefully, and you still understand the trees and how they work. So first of all, here we have the girl, then pets, here the verb, then the dog. So this is called syntax. So if it's not like the dog first, because that will change the meaning. That will change the meaning. So the syntax here takes place. That's number one, number two, and this is number three, which is the phonological representation. After the syntactic part is done, after we are done with the syntactic computation, we send the whole thing to the phonological representation. And there we have the way the signal is going to be. So this part here translates the result of the syntax to phonology, to the sounds. This is how it works. First of all, we start with the words. We know the words like the pet, girl, and the verb, let's say pets. And then we have the syntax to know who did what. Is it Ali ate the apple or apple, whatever. And then we have the phonological representation at the end. After that, this phonological representation, these sounds, are sent to the articulatory system. That's where we articulate. That's where we give orders to the articulatory system to produce sound. All right, so we have different stages. We are going to look at these stages in more detail in a minute, in this lecture and in the coming lecture as well. So, let me just erase that to make it easier for you to study. All right. All right. One of you might ask, what about bilinguals, those who speak 2 or more languages? And of course, this is related to the figure that we have here. So, lexical selection, we select words from the lexicon, or from the mental lexicon. So, what about production in bilinguals? And so we have unilingual mode, we have bilingual mode. We have 2 modes of speech production or of speaking, let's say. The first one is unilingual mode. Unilingual means there's only one language active in the let's say, and the argument. While you speak with the other person or in the context, there's only one language active in the dialogue, for example, or argument, or whatever. How many languages are active in this argument? Sometimes you have 2 languages active. What do we mean by that? First of all, unilingual mode, when there's only one language active. When a bilingual, someone who speaks 2 languages, is speaking in a unilingual mode in a situation in which we only have one language active, so only one language is used, then only one of the grammars is consulted to build structural representations, to build this, structural representations. So during this process, if it's a unilingual mode, so let's say that you're speaking with your spouse, for example, or your children, and you speak Arabic at home, then this is a unilingual mode because only one of the languages is consulted. Only one of the 2 languages that you speak is used in the conversation. This is called unilingual mode. So what happens? Only your brain, your mind, only consults one of the grammars. So not the English grammar, only the Arabic grammar, let's say. If you are at work now, imagine that you work in a place where English is used, then only the English grammar is going to be consulted. Otherwise, you will confuse English grammar with Arabic words, for example. And that will not make sense, of course. Then we have a bilingual mode. A bilingual mode. So when a bilingual, someone who speaks two languages, or when in a bilingual mode, when the bilinguals, two languages are being used at the same conversation. So imagine that you speak two languages, English and Arabic, for example, or other languages, and you are in a conversation, an argument, dialogue with someone who speaks those two languages, and you use the two languages at the same conversation. Then what happens? Access to both grammars and lexical items from both languages must be possible. All right? Otherwise, you'll only use one of the languages. But sometimes you find yourself like moving or prompted to speak one language, like English, and then suddenly Arabic, and vice versa. This happens when you are in a bilingual mode. The two languages, access to both languages must be available. All right. Now, what results from that? If you are in a bilingual mode, two interesting things would happen. These are called consequences of access to two languages. First of all, intentional switching from one language to another. And this is called code switching. This is called code switching. But it's intentional. This is intentional. What does that mean? You mean to change the language from language 1 to language 2 or vice versa. So for example, sometimes, you meet someone and you want to show that person that you speak that language, Spanish, French, or whatever. So you make a decision to speak in French or German or whatever in front of that person, maybe because you want to show that person that, well, I speak that language. Maybe you want to surprise that person, okay, because of any other reason, but you want to surprise them, you want to show them that you speak this language. Or maybe, of course, some people use it to gain like social power. Sometimes it's true, some people use it, but sometimes you use it for a good reason. Sometimes you use it for a good reason. So sometimes you make a decision to speak in that language. Maybe you use English or French or German because you don't want the other person to understand what you're saying. That's another possible reason. You just want to encode, let's say, what do you want to say, to put it into a different code, let's say German or Spanish, because I don't want the other people to understand what I'm saying to you. All right, so this is one way of doing it. So intentional switching from one language to another. But sometimes there are occasional unintentional slips into a language that is not active in the conversation. Let's imagine that you are speaking with your, your parents or your someone who is senior, someone who is old, and you speak in Arabic, but you speak about work. And let's say that you work in an environment where English is used. What happens? Sometimes there are unoccasional slips, unintentional. You don't mean to use English, but sometimes you find yourself speaking in English in that conversation, even though the conversation is in Arabic. So this is occasional, unintentional slips into a language that is not active in the conversation. Now, there are many reasons for that. We are not discussing them here in detail, but maybe at work you don't use Arabic, and as a result, everything has an English name. Let's imagine that, in mechanics, for example, in physics, whatever, in computer science, there are different parts that we know them in English, but we don't have a translation for them. There is a translation in Arabic, but we don't know that because we learned those words from work, and we only learned them in English. So as I'm using Arabic at the moment in the conversation, I might actually change the language to English and start using English words to talk about my work in Arabic. All right? Some people would say, well, you just want to show off. Well, sometimes it's unintentional. Sometimes it depends. So sometimes there's intentional, sometimes there's unintentional slips into the second language, the language that is not active in the conversation. All right, so what are the results of knowing two languages? We have intentional and unintentional slips into the second language. So this is called code switching. Switching between two codes or two languages or two distinct dialects, let's say Moroccan Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, Gulf Arabic, different dialects of the same language within the same discourse, so within the same conversation or within the same dialogue. There is one type, however, one type of switching that is called tag switching. Tag switching. This is important. So this is the insertion of frequently used discourse markers. Sometimes, even in English, we tend to use some tags like. Like is a tag. So some people say, you know, like when you move to a higher floor, for example, there are like some, you know, so they insert like a lot. Some people would use, you know, even in Arabic we use it. We say yani, for example. So while you speak, you say yani, yani, yani. So this is called a tag. But, this is another tag. Some people would say but a lot, or I mean. Okay, so these are called tags. Sometimes because you use them frequently in English, they become more like a habit. So while speaking in Arabic, you might use I mean, or you know, or so, or like, and vice versa. Sometimes because you have those tags in Arabic, you use them in English, unintentionally sometimes. So, words like yani or bes, you might use those Arabic words while speaking in English, unintentionally, without intention. It just happens. This is called tag switching. It's not code switching, it's different. It's called tag switching. All right. Now let's start talking about the procedures, the steps of speech production. First of all, planning speech before it is produced. Let's read together. Producing a sentence involves a series of distinct operations. So there are different operations and representations. The first one is lexical, so choosing the words. Then syntactic and morphological. That's number 2, and then phonological, as we saw in the figure that I've showed you before. So, producing a sentence involves a number of distinct operations. Lexical first, syntactic, morphological, and phonological. Let's look at them one by one. First of all, accessing the lexicon. The lexicon, again, all of the words of that language in your mind. A lexical entry carries information about the meaning of the word, its grammatical class, as I showed you, and the syntactic structure into which it can enter, and the sound it contains. Let's go back and check. Here, I showed you already that we have information about how the word is pronounced, so phonology, then the part of speech, and then information, semantic information about the word. So these together make up what we call lexical items. And then, of course, this has information as to where it can enter. For example, this here is a noun, right? And because it is a noun, it cannot enter here. It cannot, because here we have a verb. We have V, all right? So we cannot use this noun in this place. If this word can be used as a verb or as a noun, then that's a different story, because we have different lexical items. But if this is a noun, then we cannot use it here. It cannot enter this syntactic representation. So let me make it clearer. You cannot produce an error in which you use this girl in place of a verb here. You cannot do that, even without intention. You cannot do it. All right. And that tells us something about how we retrieve words. Retrieve as in remember. Retrieve means to remember. So, how can a word be retrieved or remembered? We have two pieces of information that will help us remember words. First of all, the meaning. Number two, sound. And think about it. As you think of a word that you want to remember, you say, well, I think it has this sound. I think it starts with B or R, for example, or any other sound. So you retrieve words by remembering the sounds. That's number one. Number two, the meaning. Sometimes you have the picture, you have the meaning, but you don't have the sounds. So how do we retrieve words? We remember the sounds and the meaning. If you put them together, you have the word. Okay? As you can see here. All right. Okay, as you can see here, we have information about, or meaning, let's say, information about the word or meaning. So that's how we retrieve words and the sounds it contains. All right, so now we know how we remember words, which is interesting, of course. Now, how quick is it? How quick is lexical retrieval? It's really spectacular. The speed of conversational speech varies by many factors. So how fast you talk. If you think about it, younger people here speak faster than older people, which is normal. Also, you have men. Men speak faster than women, which is something against what most people think. Men actually speak faster than women. Native speakers obviously speak faster than second language learners. Again, if you know the topic, then you will speak faster than unfamiliar ones. So if I asked you to talk about physics, probably it will take you longer to remember the words, to retrieve the words. Utterance lengths, that also affects how fast you produce language. On average, however, people produce 100 to 300 words per minute. So that's average. 100 to 300 words per minute, in each minute. So this is really important and interesting. So, at this lower end, at least 1 to 5 words per second. Can you think about this? So in each second, you produce 1 to 5 words. Okay? Just think of how long, just think of these processes. Now, if you talk about this process, this takes like a fraction of a second. It takes you a fraction of a second to do all of these operations. Just a fraction of a second. Now, how about lexical retrieval, which is only one part of this whole thing? So if this whole thing takes you 1 second, all right, 1 second, this only, remembering one word, takes less than a fraction of a second. It's really, really super fast. So lexical retrieval or remembering words is really, really super fast. Why? Because we produce 100 to 300 words per minute. That is 1 or 5 words per second. All right, so per second, we produce 1 to 5 words. So remembering that those words must be really efficient. All right. Now, on average, how many words do adults with high school education know? Roughly, I'm not saying every person with high school education knows this amount of words. No, I'm saying on average, there are around 40,000 words. And we are talking about English here. All right? If we talk about Arabic, then it's a complex story because Arabic is more complex than English, right? Arabic is more complex and complicated because we have roots. And from that root, you can produce many words. Think of the root kataba, for example. You have kataba, kitab, maktaba, kutub. You have a lot of words stemming from this root, which is kataba. All right, so in English, we have the people with high school education know approximately 40,000 words. Add to that 40,000 people names, all the people that you've met, places like London, Los Angeles, Riyadh, or whatever, and proper names as well. So that's a lot. Roughly, let's say 80,000 words. So retrieving one word from 80,000 words in less than a fraction of a second. Remember that in each second, we produce, in every second, we produce 1 to 5 words. So how long it takes you to remember or to retrieve one lexical item out of 80,000 words? And then we add it to the computation, to the syntax, from the syntax to the phonology, phonology to the articulatory system, and then it's produced. So how long does it take to retrieve one word or lexical item? It must be really, really rapid and efficient. Now, of course, there are some factors that influence how fast we retrieve words. One of those, of course, is frequency. If the word is frequent, then you retrieve it, you remember it quickly. If it's not, then it takes you longer to remember that word. For example, knife and dagger both mean the same thing. But when you want to say knife, you say it straight away. But dagger, if you want to remember the word dagger, it will take you longer. Of course, if you know the word dagger. If you don't know the word dagger, it will take you some time to, first of all, memorize it, know what it means and everything. And then maybe tomorrow or after tomorrow, you want to say dagger instead of instead of knife, but you fail to remember this word, dagger. And it takes you longer. I'm not going to say you fail. It takes you longer to remember dagger than knife. So you can say, I know a word that means knife, but it starts with a D. Yeah, dagger. Okay, things like that. So this is how lexical selection works. I just gave you brief information about how words are retrieved. Of course, there are other details, but as of today, I think this should be enough. And in the coming lecture, I'm going to talk about the other processes that are involved in speech production. Thank you very much for your attention in this lecture, and see you inshallah in lecture number 7. Assalamu alaikum.